Welcome back to the second session of philosophy of education, and we stopped the last time on align goals and methods. Ensure your educational goals align with your teaching methods and assessment strategies. This is where philosophy becomes intensely practical. If you value critical thinking, do your methods actually promote it, or do you primarily use methods requiring conformity and memorization? If you emphasize equity, do you practice ensure fair access to all students, or do they advantage some? If you believe in student-centered learning, uh, does your classroom organization support student choice and initiative? Philosophical consistency requires that means align with ends. Your methods should embody your values and serve your goals. This is harder than it sounds. Often we encounter constraints, mandated curricula, testing requirements, institutional structures that seem to conflict with our philosophy. Philosophy helps us navigate these constraints thoughtfully, finding ways to honor our values even with limitations and advocating for change when constraints undermine educational purposes. Articulate your philosophy. Write teaching philosophy, a statement that clearly expresses your beliefs, goals, and approaches. This living document will evolve as you grow professionally and gain experience. The act of writing forces clarity, vague feelings become explicit commitments. Your philosophy statement should be specific enough to actually guide practice, not so abstract that anyone could agree with it. It should it should reflect your unique perspective and context. It should be authentic, truly representing what you believe, not what you think sounds good. And it should be grounded in both philosophical principles, giving it intellectual foundation, and practical experience, giving it credibility and relevance. Many institutions require philosophy statements for hiring or promotion, but the real audience is yourself. This document articulates your professional identity and commitments. Components of teaching philosophy statements. Your teaching philosophy statements should include several key components. First, your core beliefs about learning and teaching. What is learning? How does it happen? What's the teacher's role? Second, your goals for students and your role in achieving them. What should students be able to do, know, and become? How will you help them get there? Third, your preferred teaching methods and their philosophical functions, why these methods, what makes them effective. Fourth, how you create inclusive, equitable learning environments. How do you ensure all students can learn? Fifth, your approach to assessment and evaluation. How do you know students are learning? How do you use assessment to support learning? Finally, concrete examples that illustrate your philosophy in practice. What does your philosophy look like in actual teaching examples? Make your philosophy real and credible, showing it's not just abstract theory. Then, activity, draft your philosophy statement. Now I want you to draft your own teaching philosophy statement incorporating philosophical insights from this course. Begin with reflection on your most meaningful educational experiences. What made them powerful? Was it a teacher who believed in you? A project where you created something authentic, collaborative work with peers, with what values were embodied. Now consider how can you create similar experiences for your students. Your statements, it should be authentic, truly yours, not borrowed from someone else. It should be specific, concrete enough to guide actual decisions, and it should be grounded in both philosophical principles, giving it depth and practical experience, giving it authenticity. Don't worry about reflection. This is starting point that will evolve throughout your career. Critical reflection. Philosophy of education is fundamentally about questioning assumptions, examining alternatives, and thinking deeply about purposes and the praxis. This critical stance is essential for educational improvement and professional growth, rather than accepting educational praxis as given. We have always done it in this way. Philosophical reflection enables us to evaluate them against ethical uh, principles, empirical evidence, and desired outcomes. Critical reflection means asking why do we do things this way? Who benefits? What alternatives exist? What are the consequences? This isn't criticism for its own sake or criticism that tears down without building up. It's constructive questioning aimed at deeper understanding and continuous improvement. Without critical reflection, education stagnates. With it, education evolves towards greater justice, effectiveness, and meaningfulness. Question assumption. Assumptions. Encourage yourself and your students to question assumptions about education. What do we structure school the way we do? Age, paced, grades, separate subjects, Carnage units, summer breaks. These aren't natural or inevitable. They reflect the historical decisions we could make differently, whose interests are served by current policies. Often, policies serve some groups better than others. Questions helps several these patterns or question help reveal these patterns. What alternatives exist for almost any educational practice? Alternatives exist that other countries, schools, or teachers have tried. What can we learn from them? This questioning isn't cynicism, or it's the foundation of improvement and innovation. Everything good in education came from someone questioning the status quo and imagining something better. Teach your students to question respectfully but persistently and model this yourself. Promote dialogue. Engage in ongoing dialogue about the ethical and the social implications of educational choices. Discuss how different approaches affect diverse learners, communities, and society. Consider multiple perspectives and be willing to reverse your views based on evidence and arguments. Education is too complex for anyone to have all the answers. Dialogue imposes us to perspectives we hadn't considered, evidence we weren't aware of, arguments that challenge our assumptions, but dialogue requires certain dispositions, intellectual humility, to admit we might be wrong, genuinely curiosity about others' perspectives, willingness to change our minds, and commitment to reasoned argument rather than just assertion. Create opportunities for dialogue and colleagues, students, families, and communities. Education improves through collective wisdom and not individual certainty. Foster openness. Cultivate openness to diverse educational philosophies and practice. No single approach works for all students in all contexts. Effective educators draw on multiple traditions, adapting their methods to student needs, learning goals, and situational demands while maintaining philosophical coherence. This isn't inconsistent, it's sophisticated. You might use direct instruction for certain skills, constructivist approaches for concept development, and critical pedagogy for social issues. The key is making these choices consciously based on philosophical understanding, not just randomly trying different things. You maintain coherence through clear underlying principles, even as you vary methods. Openness also means being willing to try approaches outside your comfort zone, learning from traditions different from your own, and recognizing that other teachers' different philosophies may be equally valid for their contexts. Embrace complexity. Recognize that educational questions rarely have simple answers. Embrace the complexity and ambiguity inherent in education while working toward clarity about your own principles and practice. Use philosophical tools to navigate complexity thoughtfully rather than retreating to simplistic solutions. Education involves teaching diverse learners with different needs, backgrounds, and potentials. It serves multiple, sometimes conflicting purposes: individual growth and social good, excellence and equity, preservation of culture and social change. It involves complex human relationships that cannot be reduced to techniques or formulas, simple answers. Just use the method, just follow these steps really work because they ignore this complexity. Philosophy helps us live with complexity without being paralyzed by it. Making principled decisions while acknowledging uncertainty and remaining open to revision as we learn more. Visualizing educational philosophies. Visual representations help us understand complex philosophical relationships and historical developments. These images and diagrams provide frameworks for organizing and comparing different educational approaches. Visual thinking can make abstract philosophical ideas more concrete and memorable. When you can see relationships among different traditions, historical developments, or contrasting approaches, you can understand them more deeply than though text alone. Throughout educational philosophy, various visual tools help continua showing where different approaches fall on dimensions like teacher-centered to student-centered timelines, showing historical development concepts, maps showing relationships among ideas, and tables comparing different philosophies. These aren't just a decoration, they're thinking tools that can deepen your philosophical understanding and help you communicate your philosophy to others. Teacher-centered versus student um, centered approaches. This fundamental distinction shapes countless educational decisions. Teacher-centered approaches emphasize direct instruction, structured curriculum, and teacher authority, reflecting essentialist and penalist philosophies. The teacher is the expert who determines what students learn and how. A student-centered approaches prioritize learners' interests, active discovery, and collaborative construction of knowledge, embodying progressive and constructivist principles. Students have significant input into what they learn and how. This isn't absolute, it's a quantum, a continuum. Even teacher-centered approaches involves some student activity, and even student-centered approaches involve teacher guidance. Most effective teachers integrate both approaches strategically. You might use teacher-centered methods for introducing foundational skills, then shift to student-centered approaches for application and deeper exploration. The key is making conscious choices about when each approach serves learning best, not rigidly adhering to one stream or one extreme or the other. Understanding this quantum helps you analyze your own practice and make deliberate decisions about where to position yourself for different learning goals and contexts. Historical development of educational thought. Educational philosophy has evolved over millennia, and understanding this historical development helps us see how current debates have deep roots from ancient Greek emphasis on rational inquiry and civic virtue. Think Socrates, Plato, Aristotle questioning and debating fundamental ideas. Through medieval focus on religious education, where learning served primarily spiritual purposes, to enlightenment and promotion of reason and a universal education, where thinkers like Rousseau and Locke argued all people should be educated, not just elites. Then progressive reforms emphasizing experience and democracy in the late 19th and early 20th century challenged traditional schooling, leading to contemporary concerns with equality, diversity, and global citizenship. Each era's philosophy reflects its social context, value, and the challenges. We're not starting from scratch. We are part of an ongoing conversation spanning centuries. Understanding this history prevents us from thinking we have discovered brand new ideas when we are often rediscovering or recombining older ones. It also shows that educational philosophy isn't static but continuously evolves. Four dimensions of educational aims. Education serves multiple interconnected aims that we can organize into four key dimensions. First, intellectual development, cultivating critical thinking, creativity, and love of learning. This is about developing minds, teaching students to think clearly, question effectively, and pursue understanding. Second, self actualization, enabling individuals to fulfill their unique potential. This humanistic aim emphasizes helping each student discover and develop their practical talents, interests, and capacities. Third, moral education, developing ethical reasoning, values, and character. This aims at creating good people who understand right and wrong and act accordingly. Fourth, social preparation, preparing citizens for democratic participation and social responsibility. This emphasizes education's civic purposes, preparing students to participate effectively in democratic self-governance and contribute to society. These aims aren't mutually exclusive. Effective education serves all of them, but tensions arise. How much time for each? When they conflict or take priority, your answers reveal your philosophical commitments. Case study progressive education in practice. John Dewey's 1859 to 1952 is seen as one of the most influential educational philosophers, whose ideas continue shaping a contemporary practice worldwide. Dewey viewed education as growth through experience, emphasizing active learning, problem solving, and connection between school and life. He rejected the traditional model of education as preparation for some distant future, arguing instead that education is life itself. Students should engage in meaningful activities. Now, not just to prepare for adulthood, his philosophy profoundly influenced progressive education movements worldwide, though often his ideas were misunderstood or oversimplified. Critics sometimes um, caricature progressive education as chaotic classrooms with no structure, but Dewey's emphasized the purposeful activity, thoughtful guidance, and rigorous intellectual engagement. Let's examine Dewey's core principles and how they translate into contemporary practice. Dewey's core principles. Dewey's philosophy rests on several core principles that remain powerfully relevant today. First, learning by doing. Students learn most effectively through direct experience and experimentation rather than passive reception and of information. This doesn't mean random activity, but purposeful engagement with meaningful problems. Second, democratic education. Schools should model democratic practices, preparing students for active citizenship. Students should participate in decision making, engage in collaborative problem solving, and practice the skills democracy requiring. Third, integration curriculum should integrate subjects around meaningful problems rather than fragmenting knowledge into isolated subjects. Real problems do not come nearly divided into math, science, history. They require integrated thinking. Fourth, social learning education is inherently social, occurring um, through interaction and collaboration. We learn with and from others, not in isolation. These principles challenge traditional schooling and continuing influencing reform efforts. Um, Example, project-based learning. Project-based learning, PPL, exemplifies um, Duane's principles in contemporary practice. Students engage in extended inquiry around complex questions or problems, conducting research, collaborating with peers, and creating authentic products or presentations. For example, students might investigate local water quality, integrating science, testing water samples, understanding ecosystems, mathematics, analyzing data, creating graphs, social studies, research policy, understanding community history, and communication skills. Presenting findings, persuading audiences. This isn't just learning about water quality, it's authentic engagement with a real community issue where students' work matters. Beyond getting a grade, the teacher facilitates by posing the driving question, providing resources and guidance, helping students when stuck, and ensuring rigorous intellectual work. Students develop content and knowledge while building problem solving, collaboration, and communication skills. This is Dewey's vision, realized education as meaningful engagement with real problems, integrating knowledge, developing democratic capabilities. PPL research finds research on project-based learning reveals several important outcomes that supported Dewey's principles. Student engagement increases compared to traditional instruction. Students are more motivated, attend more regularly, and persist through challenges when working on meaningful projects. Retention rates improve. Students retain information longer than or longer when learned through project-based approaches because they have used the knowledge meaningfully, not just memorized it for tests. Teachers report improved critical thinking and problem-solving skills with PBL. Students learn to define problems, gather information, evaluate sources, and develop solutions. These findings validate Dewey's core insight that activate engagement with meaningful problem produces deeper, more lasting learning than passive observation of decontextualized information. However, research who also shows PBL requires skilled facilitation. It's not simply less work for teachers, but different, more complex work supporting student inquiry while ensuring rigor. PPL outcomes and challenges. Progressive approaches like PPL foster multiple positive outcomes, increase the student engagement and motivation because students find the work meaningful and relevant. Deeper understanding through authentic application. Students do not just know about concepts, they use them. Development of collaboration and communication skills essential for life and work. Enhanced critical thinking and creativity as students tackle open-ended problems, and cultivation of long learning habits because students experience the satisfaction of self-directed inquiry. However, critics note legitimate challenges, including time intensity. Projects take longer than traditional instruction, potentially covering less content as assessment complexity. How do you fairly assess collaborative work and complex products and potential for unequal student contribution? Some students may do more work than others. These tensions reflect ongoing philosophical debates about educational priorities and methods. Should we prioritize depth or breadth, process or product, individual mastery or collaborative achievement? Case study: essentialism and curriculum design. Essentialism represents a constructing educational philosophy emphasizing core knowledge, basic skills, and systematic instruction in essential subjects. This tradition profoundly influences contemporary education through standards based reform and accountability movements, while progressive education asks what problems interest students. Essentialism asks what must all educated people know, while progressivism emphasizes students' choose. Essentialism emphasizes common curriculum. These aren't just different preferences, they reflect fundamentally different philosophical assumptions about knowledge, learning, and education purposes. Essentialism has dominated many educational systems, especially during periods of perceived crisis when societies demand schools get back to basics. Let's examine how essentialist philosophy shapes curriculum design. Literacy foundation. Essentialists prioritize reading, writing, and communication skills as fundamental to all learning. You can not learn history, science, or anything else without literacy. So it must come first. Students master vocabulary, grammar, comprehension strategies, and various writing forms through systematic instruction and extensive practice. This means direct teaching of phonics, vocabulary instruction, grammar lessons, and structured writing assignments, and lots of reading practices. Essentialists argue these fundamental skills aren't naturally acquired, they require explicit instruction and practice. Critics argue this approach can be tedious and disconnected from meaningful purposes, but essentialists respond that without these foundations, students cannot access complex knowledge or express sophisticated ideas. The philosophical question underlying this debate is whether skills are best learned through direct instruction or through use in meaningful contexts. Mathematical proficiency. Mathematics receives emphasis from basic uh, arithmetic through advanced reasoning. Students develop computational fluency, problem solving strategies, and quantitative reasoning essential for modern life and work. Essentialists emphasize mastery of algorithms, mathematical procedures, and conceptual understanding through carefully sequenced instruction. Students learn mathematics systematically additions before multiplication, concrete numbers before abstract algebra, building new knowledge on secure foundations. This reflects on essentialist epistemology, viewing knowledge as hierarchical and cumulative. You can't learn algebra without arithmetic, calculus without algebra. Critics argue this approach can make mathematics seem like arbitrary rules rather than meaningful problem solving. But essentialists respond that mathematical powers comes from mastering fundamental operations and the concepts that learn or that then enable advanced applications. Scientific literacy, essential scientific knowledge and the methods prepare students to understand the natural world and make informed decisions. Core concepts from biology, chemistry, physics, and earth science form required curriculum. Essentialists believe certain scientific knowledge is essential for informed citizenship, understanding evolution, genetics, chemistry, physics, earth systems. Students learn scientific facts, theories, and methods through a structured curriculum, ensuring comprehensive coverage. The laboratory methods, hypothesis, experimentation, analysis, conclusion becomes a model for systematic inquiry. Critics worry essentialist is science education can become memorization of facts rather than authentic scientific inquiry. But essentialists argue you need factual knowledge before you can do meaningful inquiry. You cannot investigate genetics if you don't understand cells, DNA, and inheritance patterns. Cultural heritage. Essentialist curriculum includes history, literature, and arts, transmitting cultural knowledge and values. Students learn shared narratives, important works, and foundational civic principles. This reflects essentialism belief that education should transmit culture across generations, ensuring students understand their society, society's history, values, and achievements. This might include studying national history, reading classical literature, understanding constitutional principles, and appreciating artistic traditions. Critics argue this can privilege dominant culture and marginalize diverse perspectives. Whose history? Which literature? What values? Essentialists responded that some common knowledge is necessary for social cohesion and informed citizenship, though they may disagree about what should be included. This debate reflects fundamental philosophical questions about education's role in cultural transmission versus transmission or transformation. Then, example core curriculum standards. Many education systems implement core standards specifying essential knowledge and skills at each grade level. These standards aim to ensure consistency in students in different schools learning similar content. Ranger standards set high expectations for all students, all and accountability standards enable assessments of whether students, teachers, and schools are successful. Teachers focus instruction on priority content, use common assessments to measure learning, and follow scope and sequence documents, ensuring comprehensive coverage. This is essentialist philosophy operationalized through policy, common core, state standards, and the United States exemplify this approach, specifying what students should know and be able to do at each grade in English and mathematics. International examples include national curricula in many countries, The philosophical assumption is that educational quality improves through clear standards, aligned curriculum, and accountability for results. Strengths and critics of standards. Core standards have both strengths and significant critics that reflect deeper philosophical tensions. Strengths include ensuring all students encounter important content regardless of which school they attend, providing clear targets for instruction and assessment. So everyone knows what students should learn, facilitating comparison and accountability across schools, and and this districts and emphasizing foundational knowledge and skills students need for success. However, critics are substantial standards may neglect creativity and individual interests by prescribing what everyone must learn. They can narrow curriculum to tested subjects, reducing time for arts, social studies, and other non-tested areas. They potentially reinforce dominant cultural perspectives by determining whose knowledge counts as essential, and they may not engage diverse learners effectively because the students have different interests, backgrounds, and learning styles. These tensions illustrate fundamental philosophical questions we've discussed. Should education emphasize common culture or diversity, depth or breadth, teacher authority or student autonomy? These are no final answers, only ongoing negotiation informed by philosophical reflection. Assessment and valuation in philosophy of education. Assessment practices embody philosophical assumptions about knowledge, learning, and education and education purposes. Different philosophical perspectives lead to dramatically different philosophies to evaluating student learning and educational effectiveness. If you believe knowledge is objective and learning is behavioral change, you'll assess every differently um, than if you believe knowledge is constructed and learning is meaning making. If you think education's purpose is transmitting essential knowledge, your assessment will look nothing like those designed by someone who thinks education's purpose is developing critical consciousness. Assessment isn't neutral or merely technical, it's deeply philosophical, reflecting and reinforcing particular views about what matters in education. Formative assessments. On formative assessments provides ongoing feedback during learning that informs um, instruction and helps students improve. It emphasizes learning as process, values student agency, and supports growth mindset. Formative assessment is aligned with progressive and constructivist philosophies that view learning as developmental and emphasize understanding over performance. Example include classroom discussions revealing students' thinking, observations during activities, student self-assessment peer feedback, and draft revisions cycles. The key is using assessment to support learning and not just measure it. When done well, formative assessment to help students understand where they are, where they're going, and how to get there. It treats mistakes as learning opportunities, not failures. Philosophically, this reflects beliefs that learning is gradual, feedback is essential, and the students are active agents in their own learning. Summative assessment. Summative assessment evaluates learning at conclusion of instruction, measuring achievement against standards. It emphasizes accountability, comparability, and certification. Summative assessment is more aligned with essentialist and behaviorist approaches emphasizing measurable outcomes and external standards. Examples include final exams, standardized tests, and of unit assessments and graduation requirements. The purpose is determining what students have learned and whether they meet expectations. Summative assessment enables comparison across students, classes, and schools, hold students and educators accountable, and credentials students for advancements or employment. Philosophically, this reflects beliefs that learning can be objectively measured, that standards ensure quality, and that education should produce demonstrable outcomes. Both formative and summative assessment have legitimate purposes, but they reflect different philosophical priorities. The role of assessment. Philosophically, assessment serves multiple potentially competing purposes. It promotes learning by providing feedback that helps students understand the strengths and areas for growth. This is a formative purpose. It ensures accountability by documenting whether students, teachers, and schools meet expectations. This serves external stakeholders. It motivates efforts by creating stakes for performance, grades, and scores that drive students' engagement through sometimes counter productivity or productively. It credentials achievements by certifying competence for further education or employment. Diplomas and transcripts serve gatekeeping functions. Balancing these purposes requires the philosophical clarity about education's primary aims. Should assessment primarily support learning or measuring it? Services or external stakeholders motivate through external rewards or cultivate intrinsic interest? These questions have no simple answers, but avoiding them leads to assessment systems that serve some purposes while undermining others. Bias and fairness. Assessments may disadvantage students from non-dominant cultures, I mean cultural backgrounds, or with different learning styles. Physical analysis that demands critical examination of whether assessments accurately measure learning or reflect cultural biases and narrow definitions of competence. For example, standardized texts or standardized tests often include culturally specific content, language, and formats that advantage students from dominant cultural groups. Time tests at disadvantage students who think deeply but slowly. Written assessments disadvantage students with strong verbal but weaker writing skills. Multiple choices questions reward certain types of thinking while ignoring other. They aren't just technical problems, they're philosophical issues about what counts as knowledge and competence, whose ways of knowing are valued, and what constitutes a fair assessment. Addressing bias requires examining philosophical assumptions built into assessment design. Then, impact on motivation. High stakes testing can undermine intrinsic motivation. Promoting performance goals ever or goals over learning goals. Philosophy helps us consider whether our assessment practices foster genuine intellectual engagement or mere compliance on the credential seeking. When it tends to focus on grades and scores rather than understanding and growth, they become extrinsically motivated. Learning to get rewards, not for its own sake. Research shows extrinsic motivation can undermine intrinsic motivation, especially for complex creative tasks. Students begin asking, "Will this be on the test?" rather than "Is this interesting or important?" They choose either tasks whether they succeed rather than challenging tasks where they will learn. High stakes assessment can transform education from meaningful engagement into credential or credentialing game. Philosophically, this raises questions about whether our assessment practices align with our stated goals of lifelong learning and intellectual curiosity. Holistic evaluation. Um, Traditional tests capture only limited dimensions of learning. Alternative approaches like portfolios, performances, and self assessment may better reflect complex learning outcomes but raise questions about reliability and comparability. A portfolio showing student work over time, revealing a growth process at the multiple dimensions of achievement that a single test cannot. A performance or presentation demonstrates application in authentic contexts. Self-assessment develops metacognitive awareness and student agency. These alternatives align with constructivists and the progressive philosophies valuing process, application, and student agency. However, they are harder to score reliably and compare across students. This reflects a fundamental tension, comprehensive assessment of complex learning versus efficient comparable measurement. Different philosophical priorities lead to different resolutions of this tension. So thank you so much for watching me teaching you the second session of philosophy of education. We will complete tomorrow the last and the final session of philosophy of education. Until tomorrow, tata for now.